we're going to be getting started in just a minute. If somebody can let me know that the stream's coming through correctly, that would be awesome. Also, some early announcements. I think I've already mentioned it, but I will be personally out next Thursday and Saturday. My plan right now is to maybe pre-record some stuff for you, as well as work on some exercises over the weekend that you guys can work on collectively. So I hope that'll work out for those time windows. And then also I do plan on getting some exercises out, starting tonight. It's going to be a mix. I've been looking for something that might be a good structured place for people to work through everything collectively. I haven't found something that I like yet. So it might end up being more of a loose collection of exercises. And it'll be a mix of just working on specific React things, but also working on just your general development stuff. And of course, always speak up if you have any questions in class, after class, or at the start of class. If you want to review something that we've talked about on a previous day, happy to do that anytime. Let's start off with this thinking in React. So the two topics I wanted to cover today, if you saw the title of the live stream, is I want to go over thinking in React. This is going to take a little while because I really want to emphasize some of these concepts. Also, this will be some of the exercises that we'll have going forward, where I'm going to point you guys at different websites for just about every class we have, probably. And I'm going to have you guys try and just look at the site and try and break it down into components. That doesn't mean you have to build those components. Just sketch out how you would break it down. Like, what would be a breakdown for it? And that's really an exercise in learning how to think about how to break stuff up. But that's what we're going to get started with first today. If anybody wants to speak up, this is the one thing that I asked you guys before or at the end of the last class, if you would work through at least the first bit of thinking in React. Did anybody work through this in the classes to try and look over this first section on how to think through building something out in React? All right, good. Awesome. So hopefully this will be review for some of you, but I'm going to emphasize it. And then we might even choose another site to try and work through. If anybody has a good suggestion for a page that they want to work through after we get through this, feel free to post it in the chat, and we'll probably work through that as well, because I want to give you an example of breaking something down, by hand ourselves, sort of doing our own exercise as opposed to just looking at what they already have. So let's just sort of go through this first section of this, right? And I like to walk through exactly how they have it put together, so I don't do a separate tutorial for this portion. And because I agree with pretty much everything they say about it. Is one of the great things about React is how it makes you think about stuff when you're building it, right? And I wouldn't say make, because you can still build something out in React using a different mechanism, or build it out without it being this sort of modular, componentized structure. And I've seen those types of applications, but it definitely encourages it. And the more that you embrace this, the easier it's going to be for you to build something out. So that gets to, if you're trying to build out a web page, any web page, usually the thing that you end up starting with for pretty much any portion of a web page or any web page anywhere is a mock of some kind, right? It might be a really low fidelity mock-up. So it might look like, like it might be something like this, just sort of a wireframe mock-up with some blocks in there saying, here's where stuff's going to go. Or even just a hand sketch of some sort of mock-up of some structure. Or it might be a much higher fidelity mockup, like the one that they have in Thinking in React, which somebody may have even sketched all of that out inside of the browser, right? It very much looks like they threw together a web page or something real fast, or some HTML to say, this is what I want it to look like, which is awesome. But obviously we can't have static HTML for a dynamic web page that's driven by some data on the back end and some other sources. So we need to be able to figure out how to compose these things so we can build them out effectively. And I would say the first thing you're going to encounter when you look at something like this is the challenge of seeing it all as one thing, right? Like, oh, this is all one component. This is all one piece that I'm working. And learning that if you break it down more, you're going to make your life a lot easier is sort of the powerful aspect here, right? That's where you're really going to gain a lot of benefit. So if we start with this mock-up in their example, and they're showing you, again, this is what I've talked about, is usually these React applications, a lot of them are just data driven, right? The front end is doing the rendering, and all it's doing is fetching some data from the back end. So instead of the back end sending back actual HTML that the browser renders, it sends back data, and the JavaScript in the browser. So this is an example of the data that would come back for these. And you've got labels. Oh, these are sporting goods. These are electronics. Those are their categories, prices, whether they're in stock or not, and the name of the item. And we won't work through all of this sample application that I sort of have in this Thinking in React, because the thing I want to focus on is the start of it and how to break stuff down. Over the rest of the class, we'll definitely be working through the rest of this piece by piece. It might be something that we revisit maybe each class to build on a little bit. But within this one tutorial, since it's sort of at the end of their main concepts list, it introduces a lot of stuff that we haven't yet reached. And so I didn't want to dive into all of those topics yet. So I love what they talk about. First thing you're going to want to do is draw boxes around every component and subcomponent or anything that sort of looks like it, and give them names. If you're working with a designer, they may have already done it. Sometimes in these lo-fi mock-ups, that's sort of what it looks like. Oh, it's just a box of some kind. But that's really what you're aiming for. And the question, obviously, is what is a component? Like, how can I identify out of this up here what the different components are in it? And that's sort of the tricky part of going through any process like this, where you're trying to learn how to think through structuring something. But one of the powerful tools you can use is what's known as a single responsibility principle. And that sort of means look at them and ask yourself, is this component responsible for only one thing? Like, how many things is this responsible for when I render it, right? So if, for example, I drew a line around the entire search here, well, that's responsible for a lot of things. It's responsible for not only being able to accept user input for the search, but it's also responsible for being able to control whether it's showing products that aren't in stock or not. And it's also responsible for listing each product that we have, so showing the actual results of them, and even grouping them by different categories. So there's a lot of responsibility, right? So if I'm looking at this, and it's been a while since I've looked at how they broke stuff down, I'm starting to see some breakdowns that help split up responsibilities, right? Like if I say, oh, unfortunately, it's not going to let me just sort of highlight there, but if I look at just this sporting goods portion, I'm thinking maybe that's like some sort of item category component. Like and then, oh, I can reuse that component for electronics. Oh, I've got a couple categories with maybe some, I don't know, items or products inside of them. So this is a product category, and this is a product. And then those look like they're nested inside of maybe I don't know, a product list. Right. Again, I've read this enough, so I might be close. I'm not exactly sure if I'm breaking it down the same way they will. We'll get there in just a minute. But this is sort of the key to learning how to break stuff down, right? Is thinking about how you split it up. And then we've got, okay, well, I've got this whole really search input, if you will, like that sort of contains both. And you might be able to break that down more if you want into a a text input and a checkbox of some kind that are grouped inside of a search input component, right? So let's go see what they did. Oh, we get something very, very similar out of it. And the names are going to be a little bit of a challenge. That's always one of the biggest challenges in computer science, is figuring out what to name your things. But we begin to see some consistent structure here, right? All right, let's see what we have. So they grouped everything in a filterable product table component. And that makes sense. I mean, all of this does belong together, but I said you don't want it all to be one component because that's going to be just too large, right? So instead, you're going to want to break it down more. So then we have, okay, we've got a search bar, and that receives all user input. And they included this checkbox inside of that search bar, which I think is fine. You could potentially break them down more if you need to. Maybe you don't need to. Oh, then we've got a product. All right, which is nice. It lists everything. A product category row. That's interesting. So in their case, they didn't make it a whole product category that rendered stuff inside of it. They just rendered a product category row as its own row in the table, and then they rendered a product row separate. So that would mean that in that case, the product table ends up being responsible for rendering the product category rows and the product rows. But it's not a right or wrong way to break it down in either direction. So if we'll just look at this a little bit and we'll see how they structured the components. Because remember, one of the key aspects of building out something with React like this is that it's composable, right? And then let's look at what they didn't include. They say if you look at the product table, you'll see that the table header containing the name and price isn't its own component. This is a matter of preference, and there's an argument to be made either way, right? That's what I'm saying, is there's some subjectivity in how you break stuff down, but it's really useful to at least think about breaking stuff down more and more, and think about the smaller component pieces you can build something out of. Then they mention like, if this header grows to be complex, like if they add sorting or other things, it might make sense for it to be its own component. And then the hierarchy is exactly what I said, the filterable product table at the top level. And then inside of that, you've got a search bar and a product table. And in the product table, you're rendering product category rows and product rows. And my initial breakdown was pretty much the same. The only difference was I had a product table and that had product categories. And then each product category could have product rows inside of them. Not a huge difference between them. And there's pros and cons to each approach when you're doing that, right? So again, not getting down into building this out per se, although we could definitely do that. And maybe that'll be an exercise I'll tackle before we go into the next section of the class, where we do a review of JavaScript classes to prepare you guys for talking about class-based components in the next class. I might just go ahead and implement this with the static data that they have up there. But one of the important aspects is learning how to look at something and break it down piece by piece, right? And so I'm going to give you guys an exercise to do this as well. I'll be posting the site. Maybe I'll take a screenshot of it so everyone's using the exact same image. And you can even mark it up if you want after class. And I want you guys to try and break it down into what could be different components for that page, and how you might break them down, right? And even think about what the hierarchy of them is, like what's nested inside of other components. How would you compose them? So let's try and work through another small example of this collectively, just to help reinforce this before we try and I have you guys go off and do this on your own. Anybody have a good example of one that they want to break down that's maybe not too complex of a web page? If not, we could potentially even use this page, sort of the React documentation, or we could just choose something else. You know, there's plenty of options out there for us to go grab and play with in terms of figuring out how to put together a web page in sort of a component-based model. Let me see here. What might be a fun one? You know what? Actually, this one isn't that bad. Let's just look at this Google Images page for a minute and talk what components here on this page if we were to try and break this down into some sort of component model. I really need to install some sort of screenshotting software on here or something. Let me see if I have anything that's going to make sense for me to take a screenshot of it and then mark up by hand. That might be what I want. I know I installed some stuff a while back and I forget about it. Let me try this. Is this gonna work? All right, let's see how this goes. All right, it's gonna send me to a web page. All right. So I don't think that's gonna give me what I want because I'm not gonna be able to mark it up. All right, I probably don't have something then just on my system that's gonna let me do that anymore. Ever since I reinstalled stuff. So I'll find something before we go on, but we'll just look at it by hand right now and sort of identify some of these sections, right? So in order to help out with that, I'll just open a new notepad here. We'll make it a little larger, too large, get rid of some of this, and I'll start breaking down like what some of these components might be if we were to try and look at them. So we could say there's probably like a whole header component, if you will, like page header and then page results, which is sort of below this bar. So that's sort of a high level structure. We've got the like page, or let's call it image results header. And image results. And you guys can help out as well if you want to in chat, like post what you see as sort of different components in this, because the key here is to just start learning how to try and break stuff down and identify what are these reusable pieces if we're building something out, right? And we won't break this down completely because there's a lot of components that would be on this page, right? A lot going on here. So what else do we have? Let's look at a few items in the header, right? We've got a, I don't know, a branding link, maybe, or a, we've got this sort of branding link here, right? All right. And then we have the search input. And then we have, just Google Apps, we could call it. And then Google Apps link or Google Apps menu, and then account menu, right? And then we've got this whole row here, which are these different Google products. And we could even group that again, right? Like, oh, we have, I don't even know, Google search categories could be from this all the way through the more option, right? So that could be like Google search or something for different types of searches. And then you've got different stuff in there, right? You've got all search engine link, because these are links, right? Google search engine links or something, right? All search engine link. Image is what we're on. You know, etc., right? And then some other options here, right? Like search or user preferences, settings. See, it's sort of interesting. It's settings here. The URL is preferences. Tools, right? These exist sort of at the same level. User preferences link. Search tools link. And I'll sort of skip over those. So then inside of, you know, looking at this continued structure bit, you know what, this one's even looking a bit more, right? Here we've got some options and we've got this more menu. Well, that's quite interesting because, yeah, we've got these other things, but then we also have more search engine. But actually, we don't necessarily, what'll be interesting about being able to compose stuff is maybe this same more is used in other places, right? Like maybe they use this on another web page, another location where there's more preference options. So it's not search options exactly, right? So maybe that's just a more drop down. And in this instance, inside of that, we've got these other search options, right? Like maps, search engine link, etc. So then inside of our image results, you know, we're not breaking it down entirely, but we've got some of these other ones, right? Like here's a good example. We've got these, I don't know what these are, suggested search terms. I don't exactly know where these go because they don't end up there. So it's sort of interesting that they're right here. It's like they're an extra filter. So suggested search filters. And then in there, you know, we've got these different search filters, but the problem is those are dynamic, right? We can't define the structure of our web page identifying these exactly because these will change. Look at how it changes when I click on one, right? So instead, what we need to say is we need a generic name for one of these, like a common term for something that looks like that. It might be like a pillbox, right? So it may be like these may be a search term or search filter pillbox, and we're rendering a lot of those depending on how many we found that seem to fit, right? So that's, you know, yet another bit that we can have. And then we've got these guys, and each one of these has some structure to it, right? An image search result, maybe. And inside of that, we have the image. And then we have the description or the link. Description, link, if you will. I don't know. I'm spitballing the naming. The naming could definitely be better here, but it's just sort of getting into the practice of looking at something like this, right? So how would you break something down? How would you structure it? And those are all going to be inside of, we've got this large image results section, but maybe all of these actually go inside of an actual images grid. And that images grid has these image search results, and those just repeat on down. And then you get into some really interesting stuff that we won't dive into right now, such as their infinite scroll ability, and where would that sort of logic live, right? React does make that sort of nifty and easy to do, and we won't dive down into it right now, but those are some of the questions about what component owns some of this behavior. And then we'll get into how do these components want to interact with each other. All right, I see somebody else posted another one. Let me take a look real fast. Oh yeah, that one's pretty simple. That might be a good one for people to do for their first hands-on exercise, because it's not too complicated. Did somebody build that? One of you guys maybe, or you just run across that? Anyways, I know this isn't hands-on coding necessarily, but I think it's really important to begin to think this way when you're working on something. So let's go back here and let's do this hands-on before we do this review, right? Is they've got this component structure. We've got a bit of data and a UI that we want it to look like. Let's just go ahead and build something out that maybe looks like this. Why not? We'll figure out how we do this. Let's see now. Again, I've been finding this useful just because it keeps everything on one screen when I'm doing stuff in here. I might switch off of it at some point in the near future to something more robust, but let's give this a go right now again. So in this case, I've put a lot of logic in this index.js file. This time around, what I'm going to do, just to help show you a little bit of working with this stuff, and this takes a long time like this. Maybe I will just do it on my local system. This is just taking forever to make changes. Let me see what I got here real fast. I'm pretty sure my version of Create React App is incredibly dated, but so let me try and install a newer version. npm install -g. Hopefully this doesn't take long. All right, Create React App. Let's just call it this one, right? Let's, I'm not going to use this. Let's call it Thinking in React. Might take a minute to spin up all the bits and pieces that we're going to use for this, but it'll give us a start. I see somebody talking about wanting to work on those projects. Jade, do you mean the ones on the React example page specifically? I mean, if you guys have a project that you would like for us to work through, like, oh man, you're really excited about trying to work through that collectively or something, if you speak up on that, as long as it seems like it's reasonable what you're at, then I'll be happy to have you guys tackle it as a class, as groups, or individually. You know, we're going to need to scale the complexity up piece by piece as we go, but I'll be happy to have you guys work on some of those. All right, this is going to take just a minute. So while I'm waiting on that, let's see if there's anything else that I need to think about for putting this together. I don't see anything that looks like it's going to be a unique challenge there. I think we'll be able to tackle it just fine. So we'll just go ahead and give this the moment that it needs to pull everything down. And all right, there we go. So we'll go into this Thinking in React folder. I'm going to do, before I do that, I'm going to do code dot this never works. Please work. It's not going to work. All right. So I'm going to open a new window because this never works. No, don't need to update right now. I'm going to open this folder. And that'll make that workspace later. So we'll be able to get started. And this should look almost exactly like the stuff that we did before, or that you guys saw in the REPL.it. There's just some minor differences here. It's got this extra service worker craft, some other new things. But nothing particularly fancy. So the first thing I'm going to do, just so that I have something here to remind me of what I'm working on, is I'm going to go ahead and grab the component model that they suggested. Just going to close this. So I've got this reference. Of course, it did not come through the way I would want. There we go. And now we can start looking at how would we build something out like this, right? And you guys can work through one of these examples as well. But this is, I just want to make sure we're working through something like this in class for everybody to see some examples of working on a hands-on project. One thing I'm going to mention right now, I need to add it to a resources section. Let me see if I have a note card here. Resources. It's a really useful thing to install if you use Chrome as your development environment. There's an extension for it, the React tools, which will make it much easier to do React development. Let me see. Oh, do I not have them on this system, or maybe I have them disabled right now? They should be on here. Where are my React dev tools? Let me check here. Might have turned them off. There we go. Give it a refresh. Let's see if that worked. Where are you? Should be able to come up. No? React Developer Tools, they're enabled. That's weird. All right, I'm going to open this page again to see if it fixes that problem. There we go. So these are going to be really, really handy as you do React development, because sure, you can see what the DOM looks like here with all of your, what actually gets rendered in the browser. Which, check out what's going on with that image, sort of interesting. But if you want to see what React renders, what it sees before it renders to the DOM, you can go over into your React Developer Tools and see what the React application structure looks like. So this is going to look a lot like the DOM, but it's going to have your actual React elements in it instead of just the DOM elements. And that's really useful because it'll help you figure out where the React elements are relative to your DOM when you're working. So going back to what we want to in here, we know we're going to want to put all this content. Oh, there's one other thing I want to grab for this. Let's grab the data. There we go. And I'm going to put that all the way up here. And just go ahead and create it. All right, so now if we're going to get started on this, we know we want to break it down. We want to have these different components to help us render our UI in some way. And there's going to be portions of this that I'll probably need to look up a reference for while I'm doing this. But the first thing is I'll just go ahead and start creating components here. And then maybe we'll move them to other files as well to sort of get a feel for this sort of structure. So function, what's my first component? I've got a filterable product table. And that's going to need, since that's this top level, maybe it's going to be by bottom up. Let's build it from the bottom up. I think that's actually going to be a little easier. Function, product row. All right, let me change the order of my windows here a little bit. Move this over there. So product row, what does a product row look like? Well, product row is going to, let's assume this is some sort of table that we have. A product row is going to have a couple entries in our table for a table. It's got the name of the product and the price of the product. Well, where are we going to get those from? Well, each item here, or product, okay, we've got product items right here, so that's pretty easy. So let's assume that each product row is going to get one of these objects passed into it. So we can assume that each product row will have an object. It's going to have a category, a price, stocked, and a name. So we know that anything that gets passed into our component, we're just going to call that props. And that's how stuff gets passed in. So how would I use this? Let me see here. Now, if you don't know HTML enough, and I'm not going to either, that's fine, because what we're saying is, okay, well, I want some sort of table row, right? I don't remember how to do a table row, so let me pull up some HTML documentation here, which is formatted all wrong. Can you go back to your proper size? No. It's really weird. I don't know why the layout's all screwed. There we go. We'll do that. So let me just look for an HTML table. So here's an example. We've got a table, which has a table header. All right. Except we're not creating a table header and then some sort of table body. Can I scroll and see the? No, it's not going to let me do that, huh? There we go. So in the body, it looks like a TR is a table row, and then a TD is, this is something you just learn doing stuff. That's like a table cell, right? All right, so if I get, let's just render it just what I stole from there. And we'll just say this is some sort of table row. Oh, I don't need to call render, that's right. I return this. Sorry, used to using class components. So I've defined this product row component, but I'm not using it anywhere, right? Even though I just have static stuff. So if I want to use it somewhere, I need to add some content that's going to use it, maybe down here. Except this is just this app component, which is actually not even in this file. It's coming from this app.js file. Okay, so maybe I don't want to work in index.js. Let me go ahead and grab all of my work I was doing. I'm going to pull it out of here and just put it in this app.js file for now. Because that way I get to treat this whole app as one component that I render at this top level. And maybe we'll change it a little bit when we get going, but I get to sort of work with it with that model. I'll even grab my data here. Right, this is sort of what I want eventually. So now I've got this product row still not being rendered. And one of the great things about using Create React App, by the way, if you're working on Cloud9, you're working locally, is it's going to be continually refreshing whenever you're doing any work. Is there a best practice method when determining components? I'll come back and talk more about that because we'll just keep re-emphasizing. I can't say that there's a best practice for finding them, but I'm a bigger fan of bottom up and learning how to build stuff. However, or at least building from the bottom up. I think that it's hard to do that a lot of times, so it's much easier to build from the top down. And the strategy I would have for that is to, and this is, pretty broad, not perfect, but just keep thinking, can I break this up more? Is there a logical way to split this into another set of components that make sense, and especially if they're reusable components? So let's swing back here. We've got our product row here, but we're not rendering anywhere in our app, right? Well, that's easy enough for us to do. Let's just, what does our app look like? It says Learn React. Let's just put a product row right here. And because it says props, but we're not doing anything with it yet. Let's see what happens. Oh, I didn't get anything. Oh, there we go. It's way down here. But I don't actually have a table to put it in, so it doesn't exactly render the way I want it to right now. Well, let's say I don't care about any of this other junk that they put in originally. So let's just get rid of it. Let's see what we have. And we've got our product row, which is not exactly a valid table. We're not there yet, but we're starting to get there. Now, what I said was this should be taking probably one of these items, right? So if I bring that in as a prop, this shouldn't be too bad. We will do var product. What are the two things we show for a product row? We are showing the name and the price. So we can get those right off of here. We can do name. Oh, want to be careful. I think that's a reserved word. So product name equals props dot. And now I have to figure out what's the name of the property I'm going to pass this in as. Well, let's just call it the product. So I've got my product name. Oh, again, let me do let. Try and get away from var just generally. So let price equal props. And again, since this is going to be the same object, dot price. Now I don't have to make these variables there. I just find it's a little useful to do that when I'm working like this. And now I can refer to those by just using curly braces in here, and I can say product name, and he say price. All right, let's see what happens. Oh, we have an error. Cannot read property name of undefined. Can anybody tell me what's going on right now? Why is it giving us this error? It tried to get props.product.name, and it couldn't get that value correctly. Let's see, product row, props. It looks like it's referring to stuff correctly. Let's look at where it's called or invoked. We're not passing in a product. So let's pass in a product of some kind. And here what I'll do, just being lazy, is I'll just grab the first item out of example data for now and pass it in. And what that's going to do is take that item and give it the value. It's going to turn it to the property product in this product row component. So when we come up here, we've got a product property in our product row component. Let's see if that worked. All right, it looks like it did. And feel free to stop if you have, or let me know if you have any questions about where we're going, or if you think this is particularly useful. I like to work through some examples while we're talking about some of this stuff. And I think this is a good one because it sort of shows this compositional nature of working with React. It's more than I would expect you guys to tackle today, but within a week, I would think you could tackle something like this as well in terms of just getting comfortable with building something up out of React, right? So we've got a product row, which is great, but we're only rendering one product in there right now with a product row, and we don't yet have some of our other stuff. So we don't have a product category row. Let's take a look back here. Looks like all that does is just maybe print out the name of the product category. All right, so maybe we can create a component for that too, right? We've got a product row one. What about a product category row, which needs to take in some sort of value or something? And what's it going to look like? For now, let's make it really simple. Just sort of build up complexity. It's going to have a table row, and then I guess inside of there, it's just going to have whatever the category is. I mean, we could just call it category. We could do some styling even, some primitive stuff, because it looks like it's maybe supposed to be bold. And normally you don't really do styling this way that often, but let's try that. So let's just statically try one. Let's write category. Let's see what happens if I put one of those in, right? So now I have a product category row. Let's take a look at it. All right, I've got a category there. We may need to change this as we keep moving, but we've got something. But what do we want to actually pass into it? We probably want to pass in like just the category name. So unlike the other example, this time I'll show you, you can mix the way that you do this stuff if you want to. This time I'm just going to assume all it gets is the one string, just the category, not the whole product. And then I need to pass in some sort of category value for this. And I could hard code a string here. I could just put category, which should work. Yep, looks like it does. But I think there was another comment in there. But I probably want this to also pull from something at some point. So in this case, again, we'll improve this in a minute, but I'll just get the example data, the first item, and then just the category value off that. So now we should be getting, all right, the name of something for real. Nice. So hopefully you're beginning to see how this will compose, right? Because the next thing we'll do is, oh, we've got a product table we want to build. What all is part of the product table? Well, let's go look at our mock-up. It looks like it's got a header with a name and price. So if we go back and look at how to build a table, oh, a table is a table HTML element, and then you can put a header in here with different items inside of the header. All right, well, let's see how that works. So I've got product category, I've got a product row. Let's create a product table, which is going to take in some props, and we'll worry about that in a minute. We're probably not going to, in fact, let's just, let's not even bring anything in right now, right? Because we're not going to work with it. And then this guy, to start with, is going to return a table. And what did we have here? Oh, let's grab some table header stuff. You can begin to see how it's nice and easy to just mix some HTML right in with your JSX. So it can be easy to sort of mix these two things together. But, oh, my header's a little different. I want it to have two items, name and price. So instead of doing this weird column span thing, don't worry too much about that. We'll create two of these, name, and I think this is the right way to do it. I could be wrong. So we've got a product table, but we're not rendering it anywhere, right? I'm going to minimize these for the time being so it's easier to see what we want to work with. So if we go down to our app, now we could render a product table as well. Let's see what happens. Sure enough, we've got a name and a price. But if we actually look at what this looks like in the React, we've got a product table with the header and name and price, but this product category row and product row aren't in there, right? Okay, so there's several different ways to handle this, but this gets into a lot more of this component composition aspect of what we're dealing with. So here's, one of the sort of simplest ways to handle this is, well, those obviously don't need to be in the app. Those are part of the product table, right? And these don't have to be ordered this way. The order of the components in this file don't matter that much, but I might play with it in a minute. So what other structure was in here? Let me go look at this. Oh, there's a table body. There's a T body element I should have, right? So let me create a table body, and I want to render something in here. And what I want are my rows and my categories. So maybe instead of those being down in my app, I will literally just render those inside of the components. Let's see how this goes. We're starting to get some real structure here now, right? Now this sporting goods thing is a little weird though, because it's outside of the space of the path. Maybe I did something wrong here. Oh, you know what? I didn't actually put a TD element there. So maybe I want to, the category is just in that first thing. Still looks a little off, but we can deal with that with some formatting, right? So now we're starting to get some composition here, but there's one thing that's very much sort of an anti-React pattern that we've built out in this, which is these components are going and fetching their own data externally, right? They're connected to this external data source directly. And so what that means is it's not quite as compositional as it seems. So how can we make this a little more composed, right? How can these not reach outside of their parent component to get data? Well, what I can do is I can pass the information that I care about into the product table. So if in this case all I care about is still the first item, but if I pass that into the product table, then I can pass that down through to my other components inside of there to create this connection. So I'm going to say, okay, these aren't changing right now, but my product table is now going to take in what is it going to take in? It's going to take in a list of products. And that's actually just going to be my example data. You notice the name can change. Like I called it example data as a variable, but then I pass it in and name it products on my product table because it seems like the most logical name for me. And then what I want to do is work with those here. And I can change this just a little bit, where instead of reaching directly out to get the example data directly, I can get that straight off of the property passed into my product table. So let's see if that worked. Let me just refresh to prove it. Looks like it did. So the interesting bit here, right, is these are now completely driven by the product table and what it gets passed in. So if instead of using the example data, I just hard coded an array here, and maybe I'll just put one item in here, which is what are my values? I need a category, a price, and a name at least, because that's what I'm using right now. Category, let me see, toys. Wow, I can't type. Price is, I don't know, $15.99. And name, I think, is what it is, right? Name is a Nerf sword. I definitely didn't put that on there because I'm looking at Nerf swords on my wall right now. That would be nerdy. But what'll happen here is now it's driven off of that data, right? It's not driven off of the example data. And so we can modify that stuff, these components that get rendered, and reuse this product table just by passing in a different list of data in different places. So I hope that's like we're starting to compose something that makes some sense, right? Now there is some stuff we're missing in the product table. I'm going to not necessarily do that immediately. Maybe I'll leave that as an exercise to you guys. I might actually give you guys what we have here. I mean, obviously the lesson, the tutorial shows how to build all this well. Maybe I'll make it as an exercise to take sort of what we have and render the multiple items instead. But what are our other pieces that we're missing? Well, we're missing the search bar bit, right? And we're missing this filterable product table. Well, I'll go ahead and make the filterable product table just so that I have everything sort of wrapped together. But what I'm actually going to do with that is I'm just going to rename this, I think, to be the filterable product table. And that's what I'll export. And let's see if that worked. Hey, it did. There's a little bit of magic there. Don't worry too much. The weird part is that the index.js is still rendering what it thinks of as app, and that's because when you export a default thing, you can name it whatever you want to name it. And we're just naming it app here. Ideally, we would change this, and it would be a filterable product table, and we would name it the same here. And that shouldn't change what actually renders. So now the only component that we're missing entirely is our search bar. So we can go ahead and build out a search bar. And this is where we wouldn't actually be able to build something that was, you could, but you typically wouldn't build this out as a purely functional component, because the search bar cares about input, right? It needs user input. And so building it out as a purely functional component would be sort of an anti-pattern. So we're going to build it out as if it would be that, even though, you know, that's not really what it would be. So let's start it off with, what are we going to have here? We've got an input element, type equals text, I think is what I want. I don't do this stuff all the time, so I may have this wrong, but I'm going to try without documentation. Placeholder equals, did they have some placeholder text here? Search ... All right, so now we've got our search bar. Oh, let me change this back so that it's using the actual example data. Now we can render a search bar component. Let's see if this works. Cross my fingers. Yeah, I've got one. Mind you, it's over here. It's not with the rest of my content. I don't have consistent styling yet, but we're getting there, right? So the only other bit, you know, that we really sort of need is the search bar needs another input. It needs to be able to have the checkbox and the text around that. I don't know how much we want to, you know, belabor this. That's another input, I think. I'll get this wrong. What does it have on here? It's like only show products in stock. Let's see. I'm sure I've got some of this wrong. And you begin to see, oh, we've got an error here, because I can't just return two things out of this. I can only return one element from my components, which means in order to return these, I need to maybe wrap them in a div or something else, so that at the top level of the component, I'm only returning one thing. All right, let's see what we have. I'm sure this is going to be wrong. Input is a void element tag and must have neither children nor use dangerously set inner HTML. All right. I'm not allowed to do that. So let's look here. Let's look at what an input is for a checkbox. A good example. Input type equals checkbox. Oh wait, this is Angular. I don't want Angular documentation. Should probably turn off Angular documentation actually. So my different types. All right, a checkbox is an allowed input type. So let's look at this example. Oh, what I need to do is instead attach a label to it. See, I'm not allowed to just put that inside of it. An input can't have something else in it. So it needs to have a label. All right, let's give that a go. And the label, in order to reference an input, uses some sort of name, right? So we can vary that if we want. We can say input. Oh, in fact, since they have to be self-closing, I can get rid of the close bit there. I know it has to be. And then I need a label. I shouldn't have deleted my text. I had only show products in stock. And I'm going to associate these using some sort of ID. I don't know, in stock. And then this label will say for in stock. These are settings that are part of HTML. You know, they're not React or anything else specific. Oh, cool. I've got a checkbox, an input. I've got this. The layout, however, is, of course, all wrong, right? So let me look over. I see you guys have been having a good conversation. I love that. Please keep doing that during class. Even if I don't get to something immediately, I'm going to take time to look over what's being said in chat and just see if there's anything that I need to respond to. So please keep that up. Let me read through this for a second and see if there's anything that I feel like I need to do to help clarify some. 0 as in the index number of the array. Yeah, that's what I was doing. I see there was some 0 confusion there. That was just me abusing the array, right? So if I take this just to show you, let's go into the console. And I'm just going to put that right in here. So I have example data. All I was doing was getting a reference to the first item in my array, which happens to be that first object. So it was just me being a little lazy there. The reason we say props.product.price is to put the code in a state where we need user input. No, that's not correct. That's just getting the value off. So let's look at what's going on in the React bit here, and maybe it'll help clarify what's going on. So let's look at our React code, right? What does React look like? Well, if we look at our filterable product table, it doesn't have anything in it directly. And neither does our search bar have anything in. Our product table, though, oh man, hold on, I'm missing the props. Hold on. The props are listed down at the bottom here. So I'm going to pull this up a little bit so you can see them. So the filterable product table doesn't have any props, and the search bar right now doesn't have any, but the product table does have a prop. The prop is products, right? So if we go back and forth between the code, that's because I'm going to collapse some stuff that we don't need. Right here for our product table, we passed in an attribute named products. And that's just a property in React. So that just, all we're doing is basically passing in whatever example data is, but giving it the name of products inside of our product table. And you'll notice that's inside of this list of props. It's even called that down here, right? This is sort of a Reactism. It's just a special name. It's not that that tricky, but it takes a little bit of getting used to. So then you've got all this stuff sort of grayed out. I presume it's showing that because it's just saying that's rendered inside of this element directly. And then inside of our table body, now we've got some more components. So now we have our product category row, right? And on that, we pass in one property, just category, which is just a string. And it's going to use that inside of itself. So this is a reference to that property when it renders. And then our product row also gets one property, which is one product object. And then we use that inside of our product row to get the price and the product name off of them. So what's going on is we're just passing data down through the application layer by layer to the different layers that need that portion of data. So sort of composing it piece by piece. Yeah, I like that reference or that comparison. Like a file within a folder, right? We're composing stuff piece by piece. The challenging bit here is a lot of times you'll pass something all the way through, right? So it's a little bit like, you know, this is a bad metaphor, but we could do a lot of different metaphors. If you've done like telephone or like an egg passing game or something where it's like you have to pass something down a row of people all the way down, right? that's sort of what we're doing here is we're passing something down a group of people. You know what a better example would be? Have you ever played like a card game where the first person starts off with a full set of cards and they get to choose one, and then they pass whatever's left to the next person and they get to choose what they want, and so on? That's a little bit more like what's going on with what we're doing here is, you know, the first component gets all of the data that we want, and then we sort of strip off the pieces that it cares about and pass down just what the other ones care about farther down. In the function where I put props, can we call it any name other than props? Technically, you can call it a name other than props, but you shouldn't. You shouldn't, because that's just React convention that you call it props. It's, you know, I believe that it shouldn't cause any problems calling it something else. I don't think they're doing any sort of reflection against the name of that variable. But it's just, you know, if you call it something else, you might get some confusing. It might make your code more confusing to other React developers. Yeah, I don't think that there's a technical requirement that it has to be called props, but it just always is, right? Like that's just the convention. You're never going to find anyone calling it something else. So let me try, just for the sake of trying this, and see what happens. It might blow up. So it looks like it worked. But again, see, they call it props here. It doesn't matter what we call it. They're going to call it props. And so it's going to be much better if you just stick with the convention of calling it props. Otherwise, it'll get really confusing compared to other people's code. Any questions? I mean, there's been a lot of good questions and conversation around this. This was a sort of complex thing that I did, right? Because all we've done so far is like a hello world. But this begins to show you some of this composition, building something out with these React components. Now, I haven't put any styling on this. I haven't structured it so that they're all fit together. And I'm not rendering everything correctly, right? Like I'm not rendering the different categories and the items in each category in a way that really works. Which we could do, but that's really getting down into just JavaScript at that point, right? That's not necessarily React specific logic. That's mostly just writing some JavaScript code to be able to do some of that. All right. So I think the next thing I wanted to cover, if people want to come back and finish this after I go through this next section, we'll see how quickly we go through it, is I want to do a review of classes in JavaScript. And that's because we're going to be getting into them in React now, and I know that we didn't cover classes particularly heavily in the previous courses. It's a very good question. I'm going to pause for a second. I mentioned styling. Does the process work the same? You have a separate CSS file that controls the styling, and you have to import it into your app or index.js files. What I'm going to say is there's not one. We'll probably do a whole conversation on styling, a whole day. Let me jot that down because I didn't have that in any previous React course that I've done, but I think it's worth talking about. I wouldn't say. Could we have created a loop? Yeah. That's what we're going to do if we get back to this at the end of the class, is we'll loop through the array. So I wouldn't say that there's any consistent way to style components. Some people will still use CSS files the same way that they're used to, where they're creating them that way. I'm not a big proponent of that myself, and that's because you'll notice we're mixing JSX right into our logic. So our component will have like component logic and what would normally be in a separate HTML file. And so I've written out several React applications. I've done them with separate CSS files for the most part. and I've done a little bit of inline type styling or CSS in JS, which is popular in React. And I'm actually a bigger fan of that when it comes to building out a React application, because it helps you think of everything as an independent component. If you are using separate CSS classes, it's too easy for a change to a CSS class to change the way multiple components look, when you should really be avoiding that. You should be having a change, for the most part, just change one component, or it should be something inherited by the whole application piece by piece. So I'll show you some of the examples of how you'll do different types of styling, but I would say there's not total consensus. There's easily 40 different frameworks that can help you do styling on components. Probably maybe 4 or 5 that are dominant as like the ones that are used more often, but there's an almost infinite number of options out there for doing styling. Yeah, I'll try and have a whole session talking just about your CSS styling or styling options in a React application. Any other questions on this so far? If not, we'll do this review. And again, I'll say it's a review, so if somebody feels really comfortable with this stuff, you know, you can feel free to step out if you want, but it's from a little bit different perspective, a review of classes in JavaScript and just working with them. So this won't tie heavily into React stuff. It's just reviewing how to work with classes. Whee! All right. So far we've only written functional components, which are stateless. This next statement isn't quite true. To build stateful components in React, we have to use a class component. That's not exactly true anymore, but let's just go with it for now. Class components can have mutable state, but functional components can't. Again, as I said, not exactly true, but we're going to stick with it for now, and maybe I'll show you near the end of the class the newer React stuff that blows my mind. I don't understand it, so I'm sort of tentative to show it to you guys and try and introduce it right now. So what does it look like to create classes in JavaScript, right? A basic class is really simple. You just use the class keyword followed by whatever the name of the class is, and then an optional extends followed by what you're extending and the class body. Nothing too complicated there. So here's a really basic example. We're creating a class. It's a person, and we're going to have a greeting property on it. You'll notice the syntax is just a little different than what we've done before for where we don't have a key value. There's some newer ES6 syntax that lets us create methods using this sort of simpler syntax instead of having to do a key value function bit. So this is nice and handy when we're working with it. And then here we're just going to create an instance of this person object, or we're going to use the class to create an instance of a person, give it a name, and then print the name. So let's see if this works in my browser. I'll just do it over here, I guess. All right, let's see. Me.name equals Jared. Me.greeting. Awesome, right? So pretty basic. I think I've got this rendering twice. All right, I'll close that. Pretty basic example of creating an object here, right? Nothing too fancy. Important parts to remember are you use the new keyword to create an instance of an object from a class. And each time you use new to create an object, it is a unique object instance from any other object created from that class, right? So you're creating a unique, different object every time. So let's take a minute. This should be pretty much a review, but pop quiz. What is a JavaScript object composed of? I'm gonna go grab some more water for a second while I go through these, but feel free to answer on this first one. And then we've got a couple more here. What is a JavaScript object composed of? Yeah, property and value pairs, or properties. It's composed of properties. And you're getting there. What is an object composed of? Ah, there we go. Key value pairs, exactly. And what is another name for a property that has a function as its value? Ooh, drum roll. It's a method. That's right. All right. So that's just a quick review, right? Sorry, I went down to get a drink of water. Other important pieces to know about working with a class in JavaScript is the constructor method is something that we haven't worked with when we were doing, wow, I can't even think of the right term here. When we were doing like direct objects or whatever, object literals, there we go. Instead, we just created them directly, right? So the constructor method is a special method when creating and initializing an object created with a class. You're never going to call it directly. It gets called when the class gets created using the new keyword. It's just sort of this automatic bit, right? Boom. And then you can set properties on an object in the constructor using the this keyword. So if we go back and we look at that little bit of person logic that we had just a moment ago, we can change our person class so that instead of having to set the name outside of it like we were doing before, we can pass in a name when we create an instance of a person, and it will set that on it as long as we're setting it in the constructor, right? Oh, it's not going to work. I've already declared this. All right, let me refresh this whole page. Let me try this again. There we go. So now I can do let me equals new person, but now I have to pass in my name at this point instead of assigning it later. And I can do me.greeting, and it works, right? And you can still change that property later. I can do me.name equals, yeah, let's just do Fred. So unless it's locked down, you can still change it, but that constructor is a really useful way to set a lot of those properties, right? And this is going to be important when we get into these React class components, because we'll be using the constructor in some of them. We'll be working with different elements of these classes. So it's sort of useful to understand where they're used, right? And then this is just, it's like a pronoun in English. It's how an object can refer to itself in methods on the object. Using this, any properties or other methods on the object can be accessed within a method. So we've already seen that, right? Nothing too fancy. Now let's get into, again, we're not going to get too deep into this. Yeah, pretty much are going to do one level of inheritance, but it's useful to understand how it works, right? Inheritance, 50,000 foot view is an object can inherit properties and behavior from another object. So that means one object can get properties and behavior from another object. And the way this works when you're working with classes, this is a little different than when you do it otherwise, is you have your class extend another class. So you say, oh, a superhero extends a person. And so if we create this class, and I'll go ahead and do it right here where we've already created our person, it's going to have this greeting instead of the greeting we had before. So let's have a superhero. Let me see. I don't know. Let's go with a different one than normal. Let's see if this works. We're going to give it a try. Oh, I guess it did. Very cool. I was mistaken. So you'll notice, oh, that's not right. That's not the fastest man alive. All right, let's create another one. So that's his name, right? All right. So we'll go with the Flash. Much better. But you notice he got the greeting off of this. And where did the name get assigned? How did this name get assigned? Because we never did that inside of our superhero. That's because since it's inheriting from person and it didn't define its own constructor, it used the person constructor, which assigned this dot name to our superhero. So if we did flash dot, or just look at Flash, we'll see, oh, it's a superhero with a name property. So it's getting some magic from that enhancement, right? We didn't have to do some of that work. And yet it's also able to change some of the behavior to be different. Oops, forget it's all on the same page. So the class that the new class is extending is called the superclass. Yeah, maybe I should have used a different example than superheroes for superclass. I don't know. But and a constructor can use the super keyword to call the constructor of the superclass. And we will get to that. I don't think, oh, I guess my next example literally is that. But that way, if you need to inherit, you need to call the other constructor, you can. And you should always do that when you're extending, is you should always be calling the other constructors as well. So let's change our superhero, except, all right, I'm going to need to rewind a little bit because I need to copy my person again because I'm going to have to refresh everything. All right. Let's refresh everything here. Let's give us more space. Let's get a person again. Okay. Come back. So now we're going to go ahead and create a superhero that extends a person. But what's interesting here is its constructor isn't going to take one value. It's going to take two. Yeah, the super thing is a little bit of, it's one of those things that's just magic. I see people saying they don't get this super bit yet, and like super class. There's some bit of that, at least calling this super here, that's sort of just magic, and you just sort of have to, you know, learn it. There are rules behind it, but I feel like the rules are almost more complex than just taking it as it's a bit of magic that works. Right? There's a whole specification about how it works, but it feels almost trickier than just magic. But what we're doing here is this superhero now is going to create a new constructor that's going to take a name and a secret identity value, right? And we'll call the constructor of the person object passing the name because that's what that constructor expects. And then we'll use the secret identity value directly in this object or this constructor. Oops, that's way more than I needed. Let me go back. I don't know why I copied so much. Let me try and get just what I need here. There we go. So now we should be able to do a new superhero, and he's going to pass in two things. He's going to pass in his name. We'll do the this time as well. And then he's going to pass in his secret identity. Barry Allen. And the Flash can greet somebody just like anybody else can. But then maybe, you know, he's in the Justice League headquarters. And so here it's people that he really trusts, and he's going to say, ah, yeah, everyone else knows me as the Flash, but I'm secretly Barry Allen, right? Because he's just going to be, okay, this is a good place to this. And so you can sort of extend with these properties like that. All right, Mary Alice says, so super refers to the class you've extended your class by. Yes, but only, I believe, let me double check here. I believe it's only usable within the constructor. Nope. See, look, I was wrong. That's why I double checked. The super dot prop and super expression expressions are valid in any method definition in both classes and object literals. So super by itself calls the constructor, but you can call methods on your parent by calling super dot if you want to as well. Interesting. So I know this isn't, this isn't intended to be a perfect introduction or a review of classes. This is sort of a touching on some of the things that you're going to need to know about as we work with class components. And some of it to do by rote with every component that you're working with when you're building them out that way. Some of it is important for you to understand how it actually works, right? So please keep asking questions on this if you have any more. That was really what I wanted to cover in terms of reviewing classes. So if you have other questions on that, I'm happy to talk about them more. Or if you want to go back and finish the React example that we were working, we can do that as well if you'd prefer to do that. Or we can call it a class and be done. And then you guys can work on some of this stuff yourself. Any preferences? Do you want to talk more about classes and examples of how classes work? Do you want to go back and finish our React component thinking in React example that we were doing? It's not just a class, it's a super class. Yes. No preferences? If I don't hear anything, then we'll maybe call it a class, and I might try and refine that thinking in React code that I have so far and try and have you do an assignment with it. I'm trying to think if that would be a little challenging right now. It might be a little challenging in terms of just the learning curve, because we haven't talked a lot about working with lists effectively and stuff. But I will be making sure you guys work on another exercise of trying to break something down into what would be components, at least conceptually, and try and get you some hands-on stuff. I think the one thing I definitely know I want everyone to do is to get a project started, like a Create React project, which we already spun up, so this should be easy, and up on GitHub. I want everyone to have one of those there so that we can have a core project that we're all working through, and we'll all start from a Create React app project. And then we can keep working collectively on that over the class. And by uploading your work, each class to GitHub, that'll help us, check on each other's progress, show where we're at, etc. Can I share the React component code? Yeah, I'll definitely share what I have for what I built. I can share I called it Thinking in React. I might just upload the code directly, upload the project. Might clean it up just a tiny bit from some of the stuff I'm not using, and then just upload what I have to GitHub so you guys can see it there. That'll take no time at all. And then if you want to pull it down and try and render all different categories and the different items in each category, you can feel free to do that if you want. All right, then I guess we're gonna call it a night for now, and I'll be getting some stuff out for you to work on a little bit in between now and Thursday. Try and keep it pretty reasonable, and then Thursday we'll start building out some React class components to go with some of our existing React stuff. And I might use my example that I did last time, where I built out a sort of timer or stopwatch, if you will, the timer first. I might build out a timer first as like a functional component to show you how it's a little weird and you can't really do it effectively, and then as a class component to show you how you might do that. All right, then. Call it a night, and I'll talk to you guys on Thursday.